is a straight-edge vegan anarchist, animal rights activist and writer. She co-founded an animal rights group when she was a student in Trinity College and has experience of working with food no bombs. Once she was called an independent anarchist scholar. And I think kind of maybe we're going to sort of experience it today. Today's workshop is titled as "We Are Each Other Towards a New Understanding of Intersectionality and Alliance Politics." So, off we go, Tina.
Thanks, Irina. Okay, my first question is, are we already filming?
Yes.
Cool, so I'll have to wait till the workshop part to get to know everybody since nobody else wants to be filmed. Please bear with me because my notes are a complete mess. So I gave a version of this talk at the Anarchist Book Fair, and the emphasis is going to be slightly different today because to cater for a different audience. There I was mainly talking to self-proclaimed anarchists. I think here I mainly have an audience of vegans, so with that in mind, the emphasis is different. So, the straight-edge band Hello Bastards got it right when they said veganism without anarchy is just another consumer fad, and anarchy without veganism is just another exploitative hierarchy. I find myself in a unique and challenging position when I think about each of these movements from the point of view of the other. As an anarchist, I am disgusted by the shallow consumerism, ignorance of related social justice issues, and narrow focus of the so-called vegan movement. And as a vegan, I regard with horror and anger the rights violations endorsed by anarchists who fail to embrace the struggle against speciesism as their own. And yet my anarchist principles are equally outraged by speciesist anarchists and my vegan principles by vegan consumerism. My argument will be that each position without the other is nonsensical hypocrisy. Indeed, that each position is an intrinsic part of and logical conclusion of the other, and that we rob each of meaning when we create artificial divisions between them. My argument goes beyond the plea for a better understanding of intersectionality by social justice activists in all their many and varied forms. The core of my argument is that since the concept of alliance politics is predicated on the existence of divisions between social movements, it should be a redundant idea. I can't put it better than the vegan anarchist Brian Dominic did in his brilliant pamphlets Animal Liberation and Social Revolution, when he calls for one holistic theory, vision, strategy and practice to achieve total social transformation. The principles of veganism have been betrayed. As a vegan anarchist, I feel alienated from a vegan movement which is deteriorating into a myopic single issue, characterised by a morally bankrupt pragmatism. The essential principle of the animal rights movement is respect for all life. Vegans demand that respect is given to all sentient beings, regardless of species membership. Vegans aspire to create a non-violent world where our relationships with one another are founded on this principle of respect. And yet, when we enjoy our privilege as middle-class consumers in deliberate ignorance, we treat those who suffer as a result of our actions with violence and without respect. Such willfully blind consumerism leads so-called vegans to celebrate the introduction of new animal-friendly products to the market, ignoring or not understanding that an exchange economy enslaves us all. What such people are missing, as they proudly boycott all byproducts of non-human slavery, while continuing to endorse every other kind of slavery by propping up capitalism with their money, is the pluralistic understanding of the dynamics of oppression in this society which will constitute a genuine threat to the system. Without this understanding of our privilege over and domination of our fellow animals as being rooted in the hierarchical structure of society, the vegan message is robbed of its integrity and radical social change remains impossible. Because where is the sense of rejecting our privileged position at the top of the food chain, as we always phrase it, but retaining all the other forms of privilege we enjoy? By no stretch of the imagination can such a limited and impoverished position be classed as thoughtful or meaningful resistance. I wholeheartedly join with my fellow anarchists in condemning what, for the most part, the vegan movement has become. I qualify that statement because I do know some awesome campaigners whose position is what I consider to be real veganism, and who live their values with more empathy and integrity than the movement as a whole. But for the movement as a whole, I feel nothing but anger and sadness. My anarchist critique of what this broken movement calls veganism is rooted in my disgust for the sense of entitlement and complacent enjoyment of privilege, which have made the cause of non-human liberation justifiably reviled by those engaged in other liberation struggles. Take, as just one glaring example, the assertion that it is easy to adopt a 100% plant-based diet. This is pure male middle-class arrogance. The most common defence of this position offered is that we are already making things difficult enough, both for ourselves and for others, and that if we address issues of oppression and social pressure in each other's lives with honesty and empathy, we will scare people off. Imagine how different the movement, and indeed the world, would look if before we asked is it popular, we asked is it ethically consistent. Pornography is popular. Consuming the dead bodies, breast milk and menstrual waste of other animals is popular. Do we really want to sell our movement on these terms? Do we want to sell our movement at all? Yet, because most people are indeed willing to distort the message of veganism beyond recognition, in order to sell something they don't even believe in anymore, look at what we have ended up with. We stumble from one short-sighted reformist campaign to another, holding potlucks while people are dying like we have anything to celebrate, and judging how much we have changed the world by how many likes we get on Facebook. We are a disgrace. Our compassion stops at species boundaries just as irrationally and inexcusably as those of whom we claim moral superiority. We, as vegan animal liberation activists, are fighting a form of oppression based on hierarchy. Yet if we do not embrace an anarchist critique of all hierarchy, we reinforce the existence of oppression in every other area of our lives, and the narrow focus of our vision has defeated us from the start. We as revolutionaries need the moral courage and breadth of vision to follow our beliefs to their logical conclusions, and this means acknowledging that vegan consumerism is an oxymoron. Veganism stands against violence, and consumption is violence. Consumption of soya products grown on stolen land that was once a rainforest is violence. Consumption of clothes and electronic gadgets made by enslaved children is violence. Consumption of plastics that poison rivers is violence. Is it consistent with our vegan convictions to stand by while capitalism plunders the earth? There would be nothing the system could sell a vegan anarchist that would satisfy their demand for a free society of equals. There would be no way to commercialise that rebellion. Its consistency could not be compromised or bought off as so-called veganism in isolation can and is. So why are we so keen to purchase new vegan products, or to celebrate their appearance on the market? The very phenomenon which, from our narrow perspective, we hail as making so-called veganism easier, in actual fact makes it that much easier for the system to ignore us. By making our rebellion consumable, they have built a niche in oppressive society where we are no threat to the established order, where we can happily delude ourselves that our lifestyles constitute meaningful dissent, while pouring our money into maintaining the establishment on which we naively think we have turned our backs. If the system has turned it into a money-making scheme, can we claim any more with any integrity that the version of veganism we live by is a revolutionary paradigm? If the state has allocated you a space, it can forget about you and everyone for whom you fight. And here is where my notes get really messy. So please bear with me, everybody. What keeps us consuming? Herbert Marcuse, who is a political theorist, recognised the power of what he called false needs to disarm oppressed peoples and keep them from becoming an effective revolutionary force. Most of the things we exchange money for are socially constructed necessities which have no value, besides the value invested in them by persuasive advertisements. Under capitalism, we have our lives stolen, robbed of all meaning, and sold back to us disguised as something we want, instead of a pathetic shadow. And to vegans, the state can sell that shadow and that complicity together with a comfortable degree of self-satisfaction. What it wants us to forget is that revolution has no price tag. What it comes down to is this. Choice between causes involves inconsistency, and there is no room for inconsistency in a revolutionary life. When we set limits to compassion, we abandon someone who needed us. When we purchase products in stores, it is our responsibility to think not only about the people whose flesh and breast milk were or were not on the ingredients list, but also the people who made the product we are holding, who packaged and transported it, and who take our money at the checkout. If we do not think about all these people, if we use our ignorance as an excuse for our complicity in their suffering, we have failed in that responsibility. And we have this responsibility because we are lucky enough to be somewhat freer than those below us in the social order. We have the luxury of deciding if we have the time and energy and resources to defend those less fortunate, if we can be bothered to join the struggle this week. They don't have this luxury. Their struggle is a struggle for survival, for freedom, safety and dignity of which every shred has been stolen. It is our task as activists, as well as our absolute moral duty, to carry this humbling knowledge with us, to never forget it, and to never forget them. We can remember their suffering, honour their pain and their memories, and do what we can to protect them with what seem to us the smallest and most ordinary actions of our everyday lives, which have a political significance that when it suits us we ignore or deny. Yet by that ignorance and that denial, we surrender the world to the system and choose to remain oppressors. And oppressors cannot live as revolutionaries or liberators. Oppressors cannot themselves be free. I am vegan because I don't have the right to take anyone's freedom or anyone's life, because all exploitation is wrong and can never be justified, and because I refuse to participate in the objectification and enslavement of others. I have met and personally known so many brave, unique and amazing non-human people whose families, lives and bodies have been destroyed by exploitation, that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do everything I can to end that suffering and misery. Yet I have also met and personally known many brave, unique and amazing members of my own species who have suffered just as terribly and known just as little empathy and justice in their lives. It is true that, as a feminist, I feel anger for the bereaved mothers among our fellow animals who are, as Patrice Jones puts it, enslaved by their femaleness. It is equally true that, as a vegan, I am sickened by a patriarchal society that permits trade in the bodies of women and children. As a vegan, I stand with and for exploited workers, battered women, people oppressed because of the colour of their skin or their sexual orientation, because all these oppressions have one name, and that name is hierarchy. Lost again. Here we are. I'm in complete agreement with Brian Dominic, who refers to single-issue vegans who fail to recognise and rebel against oppression in the wider context of a hierarchical society, as liberal vegetarians. Their lifestyles, too, are inherently violent, as, tragically, all our lives to some degree must be, until by a cooperative and inspired struggle which we have not seen before, we create new possibilities. Both non-vegan anarchists and non-anarchist vegans are making one fundamental mistake. They are trying to help those on whom they've decided, in the arrogance of privilege, to bestow their protection and concern to the top of the social ladder with them. What they are not doing is the essential task of making common cause to create a society without ladders. I am an anarchist because anarchy is the struggle that embraces all struggles. Anarchy means freedom for everyone, and with complete freedom comes complete responsibility. A vital part of the anarchist spirit is the rejection of the contented ignorance carefully fostered by the state, in favour of the political consciousness and conscience of the militant revolutionary. Is the space in this consciousness, alert as it is to the vicious rottenness of all hierarchy and all claims to privilege over others, for the knowledge of what we do to our fellow animals to exist comfortably without revulsion and without action? No one is a resource, and no one is a commodity. No one's value can be measured by how much money they make for someone else, or how much pleasure or utility the possession of their body has for others. No revolution is possible in a world where self-proclaimed revolutionaries sit down to a meal of cooked flesh and stolen breast milk of grieving mothers. Speciesist objectification is no better than sexist objectification, and the excuses for it are just as flimsy. I refuse to apologise for making these analogies. We have shied away from making them for far too long. Can we not see that their oppression is our oppression? That precisely because we are free to enslave and murder them, those above us in this fucked up social order are free to do the same to us? A revolution, as a process of utter social transformation, demands the transformation of its revolutionaries. We must lead revolutionary lives, which means striving to live and to relate to one another with empathy and honesty in a culture saturated with dishonesty. We must perpetually question the prejudices that we find within ourselves, confront our own ignorance and strive to change it. We must be harder on ourselves than on anyone else, because with the self-determination promised by an anarchist world comes total responsibility for ourselves, for our actions and the impact those actions have on the others with whom we share this planet. We must rebel against the dynamics of oppression and exploitation wherever we find them, and that includes within ourselves. We must ask ourselves hard questions and shape the foundations on which our own privileges rest, because until we do, we will live in a world filled with violence, and no one will know safety, freedom or peace. This speech is an appeal for solidarity, but I'm not asking for solidarity for my cause. I don't claim ownership of a cause. I don't understand how compassion can be encased within the rigid boundaries we invent between movements that are really one movement. Anarchy means the rejection of hierarchical dualisms, and this includes that which oppresses our fellow animals. At the core of veganism is the aspiration to do no harm, and this demands rebellion against a capitalist system that harms everyone. A vegan capitalist world cannot exist, any more than a speciesist anarchist world. Social movements have so much to share with and learn from each other, but I would go further than this. We are each other. We need to abandon the counter-revolutionary capitalist ethic of competitiveness, because if we made common cause, nothing and no one could stop us. So, for the sake of our fellow animals who were murdered in their billions or lived through another day of unspeakable misery and exploitation today, for the women and children who were beaten and raped today, for those whose lives are stolen because capitalism demands that we earn and pay for the right to exist, for everyone whom oppressive power relations has ever hurt, I ask that we stop arguing about who is more important. Everyone is important and everyone comes first. Where there is violence and oppression, there is our struggle. Think of the atrocities that happened today while we argued over the differences we've invented. These things are our fault. Right now is not soon enough to act, and the time for excuses is over. For all our sakes, we must do better. When we hand over responsibility for all that suffering to the system, we hand power to the system, and surrender the power to change everything that is in our hands. This is the capitalist ethic of it's always someone else's fault. It's so comfortable and convenient, and such an enormous, inexcusable and destructive lie. True community is the enemy of capitalist tyranny, and living our beliefs is better outreach than talking about our beliefs can ever be. It is easy in a mutilated world where all of us are scarred and we see violence wherever we look to feel disempowered. Yes, each of us is a tiny person held captive by the establishment's ruthless greed and brainwashing, and by the warped values of the society in which we've grown up. But each of us has the power to be an angry person who wants change, and who believes that, with effective strategy and organising, meaningful social change in the form of a revolution is still possible. And in the context of social movements, anger and belief are two of the most powerful things there are. The only thing more powerful, the thing on which the future of all our struggles for total liberation depend, is solidarity. Herbert Marcuse called solidarity the driving power of liberation, so that's what I'm asking for today. And today, I want to end with the words of a guy you will all have heard of, by the name of Ernesto Che Guevara, who said, "If you tremble indignation at every injustice, then you are a comrade of mine." Nice reception, folks. Does anybody have any questions or complaints or constructive criticism?
I suppose my understanding of anarchism is still very vague. Like you seem to kind of say that it's focused on not being consumerist, or I'm not sure if people who just identify as anarchists and not vegan, if they're not consuming, then aren't they vegan by default?
That's a really interesting question, and it's one I got challenged with a lot when I was involved in anarchist organising, because a lot of guys I knew,
Freegan?
yeah, which became like virtually a swear word among those of us who were vegan anarchists, because we hated the idea so much. Freeganism, for everyone who doesn't know, is an originally North American concept, which involves, to the furthest extent possible, refraining from all consumption. Freegans usually, in a dietary sense, remain vegetarian, in that they will consume dairy products, honey, eggs, they just won't eat flesh. They tend to live mainly, as far as possible, on dumpster diving and other such tactics. And they make this distinction, which I have always found pretty illogical, which is you don't get flesh out of a bin, you will get milk out of a bin. And I've had many long arguments about that with people I know, along the lines of, if you have an ethical problem with the fact that somebody's dead flesh is in this bin, why don't you have the same objection to the fact that somebody's stolen breast milk is in this bin? It's pretty illogical. Though you're asking me, I suppose, why was my anarchist critique of the animal liberation movement so focused on anti-consumerism? Is that what you're asking?
No, it was just, it was what you were saying, like...
Was it more a case of, why do so many self-proclaimed anarchists seem to think that vegetarianism is consistent with their philosophy?
No, just I wonder how you don't consume, and if you don't consume, you know, is that the kind of central tenet of anarchism?
Well, that's a really interesting one too, and the answer to that is theoretically no. Because otherwise...
question, sorry, I've forgotten how I
phrased
phrased that very
interesting questions. I want to answer them all. No, I think theoretically no, because if you consider what our vision of an anarchist world would look like, it wouldn't be all of us just going around patting each other on the back saying, yay, I'm not consuming anything.
All getting very skinny.
Well, I was thinking consumption in the sense of exchange economy. No, anti-consumerism is an important integral part of anarchist philosophy, but to a certain extent that part is forced on us by the world we live in. As anarchists, and indeed as vegans, although I, of course, am arguing for the dissolution of that division, we are living under siege. We are living in a war zone, what is for us a war zone, and we're doing our best to survive in that environment. So
it's kind of like all food is kind of commodified
yes,
unless you go around
essentially.
eating down.
Yes. To quote phrase I like, there is no pure land. So you're asking how, in a practical sense, one avoids consumption.
Yeah.
I was hoping someone would ask me that. I was really hoping someone would ask me that, because one thing we are thinking of doing is running a workshop called Living the Great Refusal. The Great Refusal is another concept from my favourite political theorist, Herbert Marcuse. And what I want it to be about is the practicalities of a lot of the stuff I've outlined today. You know, so we're going to be going into how you actually live without capitalism in a world ruled by capitalism, you know. So, unfortunately I could talk for about 3 hours about that. Yeah. So I'm going to try and confine my comprehensive answer to that question to that workshop. But,
community, is that it?
Yes. Well, nothing can be done alone. Nothing effective can ultimately be done alone. The answer is community hand in hand with the celebration of difference, and that is part of the essence of anarchy. I mean, if you're asking how does one remain ethically consistent in capitalist society,
you don't.
You don't. Nobody does. And that's what I meant when I said that to a certain extent all our lives are inherently violent.
Yeah.
I'm not holding myself up as this amazing example of anti-consumerism. That would be both really deceptive and really arrogant, which are both qualities I try hard to avoid. But I use electricity, I have hot water, you know, how are these things produced? by a capitalist system. There was inequality and violence somewhere along the line. You know, I think my highest ideal right now in the society I live in is a life of constant questioning, you know, and never, which basically means never accepting something because somebody higher than you or more knowledgeable than you supposedly told you so, you know, constant questioning. That isn't to say that you pick up something off the shelf and think for 10 seconds, how was this produced? Oh my god, that is so sad, it came all the way from Argentina, oh dear, now I'll go and buy it. Because if I was in one of these situations, what I refer to as a constant struggle for survival, and somebody came up to me and said, I thought really sadly about your situation today before I gave money to your oppressors, I would say, thanks very much, fuck off. So I'm not questioning along with action. You know.
The YouTube has just gone 18 certificates. Can I have a question?
You can have a question.
A couple of questions. There's a lot in that, so thanks very much for what you said. I think there might be 2 or 3 questions in this, but really I suppose the objection you get from the opposition is the usual kind of how practical is it? Yeah, so that's one thing I want you to kind of address, because that must be one of the things that people first, well, this is all very well and good, but, right? And then also, you said, thinking in your talk, you said that alliance politics was redundant. So I wonder if you could explain that as well.
Yes.
Okay.
What 2 brilliant questions. Now, shut me up if I take too long about this, because I think poor Roisin regretted asking me so many interesting questions. Okay, the first one, how is it practical? I think to a certain extent I've already been talking a little bit about that, which is, it's not. And there is a line to be drawn between striving to your utmost to personally live that ideal and becoming completely ineffectual ivory tower revolutionary.
You said in the Anarchist Book Fair that everyone was a hypocrite, including yourself, didn't you?
Yes, absolutely. And one thing I really want to avoid is the impression that I'm setting myself up as some kind of oracle on the subject, which is far from the case. I'm as much a hypocrite as like anybody. But yes, an interesting thing in that regard is actually an interview with an anarcho-primitivist guy in a book called Sober Living for the Revolution, which is focused mainly on perspectives on the straight edge movement. But as you know, probably, anti-consumerism is a big part of straight edge philosophy. So that was gone into in some detail. And this guy kept being asked, you know, he was saying, oh, we should all live our ideals, we should retreat from civilization, we should practice survival skills, and we should go live in the forests, and we should reject capitalism and just let them fight it out until everything crumbles away and we're left with this desert and we can reconstruct, you know, real life.
Well, several years ago there was that big debate, so you probably were a part of that, I don't know, but you know, the vegan suicide thing, you know, there was a big claim that to be a real vegan you should commit suicide because that's the only way you can cause no harm.
Well, that's an interesting, though separate question, which is actually addressed in an anonymous essay called Half Revolutions in another book published by the Crime Think Ex-Workers Collective. And the 3 half revolutions that they focus on are suicide, shoplifting, and adultery, which are a strange combination of things. But
that sounds like one of my mornings.
I really hope not. But they're saying that these things, they are an attempt at rebellion, and they are an attempt at integrity. However, what they all essentially do is leave the world the same. So, to a certain extent, from a political perspective, suicide is that half revolution. It's an attempt at complete rejection. And yet, it leaves the world the same. You know? And also, it's, You know, I said in my talk, we have the luxury of deciding whether to join the struggle this week. That's another luxury we have, really. You know? There's plenty of people who live in unspeakably worse conditions than we're experiencing right now. We're all unfree, but there is unspeakably worse than that. And they don't have that option. I mean, you know, a hen in a battery cage. One tragic example, one tragic life. She just has to live every single minute of every single day. She doesn't have that option. So it's all very well for us to think, fuck this horrible world. Indeed, it's incredibly natural and rational for us to think, fuck this horrible world. But we are leaving someone behind, so that's an important thing to think about in that respect. Back to what you were saying about how far is this practical. I wanted us to mainly leave that for discussion in the workshop about the Great Refusal concept. But suffice to say that this interview with this guy who claimed to be an anarcho-primitivist ended up being endless justification for hypocrisy and a defence of a long succession of false needs. Because this interviewer guy was actually pretty good. He kept saying, you know, okay, so we should all retreat into the forest. Why aren't you in the forest? He said, oh, because I'm here to talk to you about how we should retreat into the forest. Okay, fine, why are you wearing shoes? Well, you need shoes, you know. And, you know, you have a computer, you're in a band, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but, you know, to a certain extent, you have to sort of live within this world. So he completely destroyed his own method. So it's an interesting case study in endless defence of hypocrisy. So, I think ultimately the striving for consistency in your personal life has to be an element of your personal revolution. And the other element of your personal revolution has to be connection and cooperation, the creation of community. Because without that, if you go off into the forest and live in a tree and never wear clothes again, the system is not going to care. So you have to reach others while being consistent as you possibly can. Because two things I hate are, one, people who claim that they live in a tree and don't wear clothes and that's fine and they've saved the world. That irritates me. And the second thing I hate is justification of a lot of shit in your life by saying, oh, but you're a hypocrite as well. I'm sure, as vegan campaigners, we've all had that one. People confront you and say, yeah, sure, I wear leather, I go to McDonald's, but look at you, you're wearing clothes, and I bet those clothes were made in a factory that used child labour, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, because you are doing some conscious questioning, making some political decisions about your life, and yet they're not working, I don't need to make any decisions at all, you know. So I hate that, you know. People appeal to the impossibility of complete consistency to justify their own laziness, and I hate that. What was your other question, by the way?
It was
Alliance politics.
Yeah, well, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I got the feel at least that you were suggesting that intersectionality is a challenge to alliance politics, or...
Yes, that's absolutely true, it is. One thing that dismayed me when I was looking at my notes here was that I found I'd put the words in the wrong place. I was suggesting that alliance politics was a challenge to intersectionality, but therefore intersectionality should cease to exist, which was very worrying for me because it's nonsense. So essentially, intersectionality, as we're going to explore in tortuous detail after our tea break, has its origins in the black feminist challenge to radical second wave feminism, whatever you want to call it, focus on gender as the root of oppression. And the rationale behind the idea of intersectionality is that oppressions are impossible to isolate. They're impossible to untangle. both in any one life and in society. Multiple oppressions are at work in one life all at once, and you can't get one out. And alliance politics is actually the antithesis of that, because what alliance politics does is reinforce divisions. Alliances are making common cause to further both your interests, but there's a both there. Intersectionality, understood properly, means the breaking down of borders. Alliance politics means temporary alliance between people whose borders remain there, So I think we're going to go into that in some depth in the actual workshop about definitions of alliance politics and intersectionality, and how a proper understanding of intersectionality in the animal rights movement would result in the demise of our endless search for effective alliance politics.
Understood.
Thanks.
I saw an article today on one of the feminist website things I follow, and it was saying that we need to stop focusing on patriarchy and replace that with hierarchy. It's something like that.
Yeah. That's a interesting and problematic concept. I'm wondering if I saw the same thing as you. Not written by somebody called Thinking Girl, by any chance.
I don't have a clue. It's kind of half gone from my head. I just remember the title.
Yeah.
And I was just all like,
yeah. She goes into quite some justification of that position, actually. And didn't you find that it was rather confused?
I don't think I read that much of it.
No, what I think she was. No, I must confess, I was really confused. What I think she was getting at, though she didn't do it very well, in my opinion, was a challenge to the concept of gender divisions. Did you get that out?
She seemed to be getting at the whole, it's possible to be both oppressor and oppressed kind of thing, that we can fight. I think the example she gave was like a queer woman can fight homophobia and patriarchy while also enjoying the privileges of being cisgendered and white.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I think that was the same thing. Yeah, I found it rather an unfortunate article in some respects. So it was an attempt to address intersectionality, which, again, actually that really feeds into an exercise we'll be doing if everyone's happy with it, which is questioning our own privilege and examining our own oppression.
Not a recent BuzzFeed.
Yeah, so I think to take the focus off patriarchy there got confused when she took the focus off intersectionality, I agree, patriarchy is not isolated, but she could have made that point without starting to stress the social construction of gender divisions there, because that's a different thing, So if we read the same thing, I think we did, because that same example was given. She was trying to do too much in space, I think. We done?
Tea break.
Tea break.